there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin media space that will never talk about this or what you just mentioned. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of money and effort has been put into specifically homogenizing media discourse in the Bitcoin space, because they want Bitcoiners as much as possible to be compliant, while Larry Fink and his ilk do what they want with Bitcoin and make it what they want it to be, so that people are content with number go up and sort of the Sailor-esque talking points that have gotten a lot of...
Welcome back to our channel. In this video, we explore the most recent observations made by renowned investigative journalist Whitney Webb. In a recent interview with TFTC, Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin, the main editor of Bitcoin magazine, discussed how crucial it is to preserve the essential principles of Bitcoin. They talked about how individuals may be freed from the repressive old financial system by using Bitcoin. Whitney does, however, provide a warning. A lot of Bitcoin fans are being led mistaken to think that Wall Street giants like BlackRock are supporting the industry. She contends that we could be ignoring the most important principles in favor of the numbers game, with possibly disastrous consequences. Without further ado, as we bring you snippets from the interview, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications for more videos like this.
I think the cornerstone of the response really does need to be self-reliance, because if you're hoping on people in the private sector solving this problem for you because they don't like ESG, I don't think that's enough at all. And talking about this public-private play, it's important to keep in mind that what happens, I mean, just look at this, the Treasury Secretary office alone. So like in Clinton, it was Robert Rubin, Goldman Sachs. He helps repeal Glass-Steagall. And then when that whole bubble pops in 2008, Goldman Sachs' Henry Paulson is set Treasury of the Secretary. Then it's Tim Geithner, who worked under Larry Summers, and Robert Rubin is Treasury Secretary under Obama. And then it's Steve Mnuchin, who was involved in the 2008 financial crisis and whose dad was one of the top guys at Goldman Sachs, and he was also Goldman Sachs. So what they do when they're in power is that they create policies that help benefit them. You know, they came from Goldman Sachs with intentions to implement policies that benefit Goldman Sachs. Right. And so generally what happens is that when the private sector wants something, or they've created a big market for something, they've invested lots of money in creating something like the carbon market, and no one's using the carbon market. They are going to then use the public sector to force people to use the carbon market. And so they're trying to do that through the guise of climate emergency, right? And that's not working. So if that's not working, how will they go about and how will they do it? Well, like Mark and I have discussed before, they're trying to go about it the private sector route. Oh, okay, you guys aren't interested in programmable, surveillable money if it's emitted by the central bank. So if it's emitted by a private bank, maybe you will, right? But the other side of this is what's happening in places like Argentina right now, where people have lost so much of their purchasing power. So like before Milei came to power, I think the poverty rate was it was insanely high. I think it was something like 60%. And then Milei came into power and devalued the currency by 50%, which led to a massive loss in purchasing power for Argentinians on top of that. Now Argentinians are so desperate and are being told that they're undergoing quote unquote shock therapy designed by a JP Morgan guy, that they're doing WorldCoin. They're scanning their eyes in the Sam Altman orb for shitcoins and a cattle tag, a digital ID. And the idea is to have that be like your access to the internet, and using, these tokens and these stable coins, using Tether, using USDC, whatever supported by Mercado Libre's giant entity, Mercado Pago, which is also integrated with Brazil's biggest crypto exchange, Mercado Bitcoin, and then there's Ripio in the mix, which is partnered with all of these guys too. They're going to control all the rails that stuff runs on, and that's where people are running because their money has been so devalued and they have no alternative. And I think that's ultimately the goal, is to get people on programmable, surveillable money by any means necessary. So if you won't do it because you're like, oh yeah, this is a way I'm going to use JP Morgan coin and beat the Fed CBDC. If you're not going to get suckered into that, then, it seems like they'll use destabilization and desperation as a way to get people to onboard into the systems that they're creating. They're not just going to spend billions of dollars creating these systems and have no one use them. They're going to try and use either, desperation created by public sector policies or by private sector policies and then have, sort of like 2008. Oh, look, the private banks have destroyed the economy. Now we need the public sector to come in and rein them in, even though Obama's cabinet that was supposed to be doing that was literally chosen by Citigroup, right? They're the ones that are going to come in and they're going to rein these in, and these are the policies and changes that need to be made, but actually it's the bankers that wrote the changes that need to be made.
Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin have uncovered a significant effort to push Americans towards using stable coins and digital tokens controlled by commercial banks. In a detailed joint article on Bitcoin Magazine, they expose how Fluent Finance, a former partner of Farmington State Bank, a small rural bank involved in the FTX scandal, is collaborating with American banks to introduce a joint US dollar stablecoin. The article makes a crucial point, which is that despite any concerns about governments and central banks programming currency to run out, these concerns will be carefully resolved if the Fed publicly rejects a central bank digital currency, CBDC, that is directly created. This apparent victory, meanwhile, may be a front, as the stablecoin and deposit token system that will take the place of a direct digital dollar could covertly provide established bankers and businesses, including those connected to the FTX scandal, unprecedented power over financial operations in the United States and overseas. Whitney Webb cautions that Bitcoin is still the only way to protect against this approaching control. Let's hear what Webb has to say.
We're likely going to get set up for something like that, where they're going to try and make like existing money worthless. And if you want your money to be worth anything and maintain any sort of semblance of purchasing power, you have to use financial products X, Y, and Z. And they're all going to be programmable and surveillable, if not by the private sector, by the public sector. And they're all going to be interoperable. They're going to be all these different wallets and digital ID systems that look like they're different companies, but they're all the same, essentially, in terms that they can export all their data to the same central global database. And, that's essentially the goal here. So how do we fight against that? Don't use the database, don't use the digital wallet, don't use the digital ID, don't interact with the system. And I think also, I think Bitcoin is obviously very key to their plans, but they need Bitcoin to stay, as Larry Fink said, a technology for asset storage. They refuse to have it be a currency. And actually, Jeffrey Epstein gave an interview about Bitcoin that I didn't know about until maybe a couple months ago when we started researching this. Yep. Oh, yes. No and idea. He says the exact same thing Larry Fink says. It's not a currency. It's, a technology for asset storage. Basically, if Bitcoin is kept in that box that people like Larry Fink and Jeffrey Epstein and people like them, Larry Summers, presumably, who was on the Zappo advisory board, these guys want Bitcoin to be a specific thing because they can use it. And there's people in the space, like this RSK guy, saying Bitcoin needs to lose its revolutionary ethos. It's got to drop that and become a tool for Wall Street. I think it's pretty obvious what needs to be done to scuttle those plans, which would be ensure the opposite. There's a lot of people in the Bitcoin media space that will never talk about this or what you just mentioned. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of money and effort has been put into specifically homogenizing media discourse in the Bitcoin space, because they want Bitcoiners as much as possible to be compliant, while Larry Fink and his ilk do what they want with Bitcoin and make it what they want it to be, so that people are content with number go up and sort of the Saylor-esque talking points that have gotten a lot of, a lot of people have heard those versus what you just mentioned, from example. There needs to be a cultural shift in Bitcoin in the opposite direction of what this Diego guy from Rootstock said, where he's like, we need to drop the whole, stop fiscal irresponsibility of the banks and central banks and, be a challenge and threat to their power. We have to drop that if we want to get rich. I mean, that's the mentality there. And I feel like the Saylor mentality really isn't that different from that. We have to push people in the other direction, because if we go in the direction they're pushing those, people to go in, people that want to drop the ethos or whatever and make Bitcoin just a tool for Wall Street. I mean, no. If we let that happen, very bad things happen. And there has to be a fight. And there's a specific effort that's been launched against people that hold Bitcoin to try and get them to be compliant in that sense. And that's through, controlling the discourse in the media space. There needs to be a desire among Bitcoiners to return to the original ethos, not the opposite. There needs to be a fight for that. People need to care about that again.
The observation made by Whitney Webb highlights a crucial worry: the possibility that in the future, traditional cash may lose all of its value and force people to use programmable financial instruments that are under the authority of the public or private sectors. These goods would work together, giving the impression of being distinct entities while eventually providing data to a separated worldwide database. Webb suggests staying away from digital wallets, digital IDs, and interfacing with such systems completely in order to fend against this intrusion on financial independence. She stresses that Bitcoin is important in this context, but she cautions against trying to limit it to only asset storage, as others like Jeffrey Epstein and Larry Fink have proposed. They see Bitcoin sacrificing itself of its revolutionary potential in order to serve Wall Street's interests. In order to maintain the original Bitcoin community's mission of opposing financial irresponsibility and central bank domination, Webb calls for a cultural transformation within the community. She issues a warning against narratives that aim to standardize the conversation around Bitcoin and supports opposition to attempts to turn it into an instrument of the status system. Until next time, don't forget to like, subscribe for more videos like this.